Everybody that registered and attended gets a copy, and I want to welcome you to this discussion. So what we're going to be doing today is covering how to utilize Google Sites as your operations manual or as your company intranet. It's something that gets widely discussed and widely ignored only because it does require a lot of work. So my goal for today is to provide a framework that'll help you get to where you want to be. Also, please bear in mind that if you stay for the duration of today's session, I will make sure that everyone gets an instant access to our white paper, which outlines everything that I'm going to cover today in great detail. So hopefully that will be of use to you, and if you stick around, we'll make sure you get that copy. Also, this session is being recorded, so we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of it as well. Just for some housekeeping, ask questions. So if you're using the web interface for GoToWebinar, there should be a little tab on the right-hand column that says questions. Please feel free to utilize that. If you're using the downloaded app for GoToWebinar, you'll see this image, and this should look pretty familiar to you, minus the showing screen options and starting broadcast, etc. But you'll see a little drop-down arrow for questions, and that's where you can enter. We'll be following them throughout, and I want to make sure that we get to those questions to the best of our capability. So let's talk about Google Sites. There was a recent update to Google Sites. So it's created some confusion with some of the folks that utilize G Suite, primarily because our organization, for example, still utilizes the old sites, but there is this new sites as well. So there's kind of a mishmash of what exactly am I going to utilize, how do I do it best. So I want to show you some of the aspects of the newer version of Google Sites and also talk about things that you can do today in both fields. So this framework applies to either the new sites or the old sites. So hopefully that will give you a little sense of relief. But if you are unfamiliar with the newer version, and by new I mean June of 2016, so it's been a while, but some folks haven't rolled it out, myself included. So I wanted to take just a few moments to talk about it and get you an understanding of what to expect for this updated version. So the update is pretty substantial. A lot of it is cleaner looking. It's really, they focused a lot more on the interface and a lot less on the granular, boxy details of how it used to function or how it functions in the older version. So you'll see that real-time editing is something that's coming, or that's part of it. Instant mobile optimization, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more, that I really I've been looking forward to. And then a real well-rounded integration with G Suite around this easy interface. There's also, they made it really easy to create sites. So beforehand, you had to go to the app, and you still can. If you're doing a Google search and you're logged in through Chrome, you'll see the little, those 9 buttons on the top right-hand corner. You tap on that, and you can get to Gmail, Calendar, etc., including Sites. Well, in addition to that, Sites is becoming part of the Drive suite. So if you're in Google Drive and you have the new Sites enabled, you can click on Create New, and then you'll see the option underneath Docs, Sheets, Slides, and Sites, which is kind of neat. That's something that's new, and I like the way that they're looking at Sites as part of this suite that Drive provides you. It's worth repeating that real-time editing is going to be something that's such a big change to Sites, especially if you're the type of person that has spent a lot of time in Sites kind of on an isolated island. I know I have, and part of where we came up with this framework was just spending hours of trying to understand the critical information that is necessary to design this. So with real-time editing, it's going to relieve a lot of that pressure, because you can actually work just as you would with in a Google Sheet or a slide or doc, and have that same type of capability if you were to use the new Sites. Mobile optimization, just to touch on that really quickly, is something that I've I would argue is probably the biggest differentiator between the old version of sites and the new version of sites. Primarily, if you were someone that says, hey, I want to use a Google site, I have a lot of field workers, I've embedded a form into the site, and it's really helpful for time entry. If I'm on the job and I'm trying to enter information and that's critical to the business, and I want them to have this shortened URL to go to the site, it's great. Probably a little bit better, cleaner on a tablet or a Chrome device, and not as friendly on a mobile device such as an iPhone or an Android phone. That'll change if you utilize the new sites, because it will automatically optimize, and that is a huge change. I know I've worked on a lot of forms for organizations in the past, trying to make that field worker story more compelling. Functionality-wise, you can get it done. Simplicity and ease of use has been challenging, so I look forward to hearing of folks utilizing that. Another substantial change is just how accessible sites will be from Drive. I already mentioned that a little bit, but I just wanted to let people know that for admins, there is going to be more information available to you, easier transfer of ownership, which is really helpful as well. That's just something that has been yearned for. It's just being able to do a lot more. Also, no quota management is great. Sites was kind of an anomaly for a while. Actually, quite frankly, I think Sites was sort of the ugly stepchild of G Suite for quite some time, until this new refresh happened. But from a functionality standpoint, and what we're going to talk about, Sites is really something that gets undervalued a lot, because I think it can solve a lot of business issues. So let's discuss utilizing Sites in order to build out an operations manual. When we look at G Suite, there's really so much to consider. We have emails, files, calendars, forms, and images that all relate to processes and policies that become overwhelming to manage and maintain in an orderly fashion. Further, each application within the suite adds beneficial efficiencies to your organization. But today we're going to just kind of focus in on Sites and how it can benefit you by creating a central repository for those processes, those manuals and handbooks, an overall hub for your operations. So organizing all of the pertinent operations data is no small feat. In fact, this is why so often it gets pushed aside and saved for another day. However, not having a central repository or hub for operations can lead to challenging onboarding and offboarding procedures. For example, if you, let me just doop. There we go. If you may find the process of onboarding and offboarding challenging, well, here's some these are the types of tasks that become overwhelming very quickly, especially when there's a time constraint, which happens all the time. As a support-based organization, our mission is to help and find ways to help folks improve their organization, be more productive. A lot of times when people are hiring or firing, that is where most of our clients are, I would say, in a panic, if you will, because a lot of times these decisions are not strategic, long-winded, not well-winded, long experiences, right? It's someone got fired, someone left the company, and they need to replace that person as soon as possible, or they need to secure the data that person was connected to as soon as possible. And there is very clearly a checklist that every organization has, but a lot of the times it lives in someone's head, and that is challenging, especially what if the person leaving is the person that had it in their head, and then you're really in a tough spot. In addition to processes, though, what about all those documents in like the employee handbook? A lot of organizations don't even have a handbook, but they should, to just walk through, so that when someone joins the organization, someone questions a policy within the organization, there's a place to reference it. And version control is also part of that too. And insurance and tax information that needs to be completed on day one. Information can quickly become out of date disorganized. And lastly, I can't tell you how often in previous places of employment it was next to impossible to ensure I had the right version of our media kit, of our about our organization, etc. That is a challenge, and there is a desperate need to have a place where that current information, where people can know this is the single source of truth, where I can go to find that information, should be living. So the way that sites works and functions today doesn't always answer, and this is the new version and the older version, doesn't really answer the questions and challenges that HR and organizational leadership are after. Sites, like Drive, gives anyone the freedom to create, edit, and share their own content. Although it's great to have that freedom, it might not be ideal for operational purposes. And then we hear from leadership that a central location to store and access relevant information is a must. Further, such information is highly sensitive and only the right people should have access and/or editing capabilities. Lastly, they want some type of way to ensure the information is actually being read and the right people are being notified when information is available. So at Ripple, we were faced with an interesting dilemma. If you're familiar with the same dilemma we faced when we worked on our switching from a file server to Google Drive, we had kind of the same dilemma at hand. And if you haven't seen that, please, I encourage you to go to Ripple's website or follow our social media. You'll see direct links to get access to our white papers on switching from a file server to Google Drive. Good stuff. We just did a webinar, so if you're interested, reach out to me directly. I'll get you a copy of the recording if you'd like. So, but where we're at, though, is that we have this really cool tool with G Suite, and you could create project sites to store and share information from the entire app suite. But from a leadership and HR standpoint, the traditional thoughts behind an intranet that required management and permissioning gets a little lost. So we think there's a way to take advantage of both this freedom while still securing the organization, organizing the information as well. There you go. So here's what we'll talk about. First and foremost, this isn't a simple plug-and-play task. It does require serious consideration and planning. Without it, you'll end up being no better off than you are today. Next, we'll discuss building out a table of contents. This will be critical in architecting your operational site. We'll also talk about the type of content that should be added to the site, especially the dashboard, as the goal is not only to have the site serve as an operational hub, but also as a location your staff depends on. If you can get to a point where your site is the answer to so many questions and becomes habitual for the staff to say, did you check the ops site? Then you've done your job. You've succeeded in exactly what people want from this type of intranet. Then lastly, we'll touch on some of our best practices in permissioning within Google Sites to ensure the content is both accessible and only editable by those who should. As explained, planning is the most critical piece to this puzzle. If you thought you could just get it, download a template from us, I apologize, but you're out of luck. But we will give you some guidelines, and again, I will share our white paper at the end of this session so that you can use that to really develop your framework around making the right, starting off in the right direction. So here are the guidelines for the site. An operation site should be owned by a non-human admin account. This is very familiar if you're used to how we architect Google Drive. And it also goes back to general IT best practices. But it is something that gets overlooked when focusing on the newness or the work involved in deploying G Suite across a domain. If you want to what you want to do is you want to separate the super user accounts from the day-to-day work. You'll also want to grant view access so that everyone in the organization can view the site. You can get more granular about editing permissions or page level permissions later. And you'll want to customize the permissions so that only the non-human can add or remove who has access to the site overall. So next, in planning, you'll need to consider what the landing page should represent. We prefer to consider the landing page for an operations manual more of a dashboard. With this, think about the items that matter to everyone in your organization. The list will probably grow exponentially, so be sure to trim it back when you're done. Simple is always better in this case, so try to keep it less than 10 items at most. 5 to 6 is preferred. And then lastly, what we're going to talk about is the term think like a Martian, something that I rely on quite heavily whenever I'm working on something like this. So let's start with that, actually. Thinking like a Martian is a helpful metaphor, right? Imagine that this is the first day on the job, and in short, you're clueless and having one idea about anything that's around you, who the right people to speak with are. You might even not really know what you need to do. You might ask, do I need to read and sign an employee handbook? Do I need to, where's the restroom? How many tax forms or non-disclosure agreements do I need to fill out? Where do I get my computer? Do I get a computer? What's my phone line? How do I get access to my benefits? Are there benefits? Where can I go to make sure I understand and learn what is expected of me? All of these are extremely important questions and need to be answered. And so when you take a step back and you start to think like a Martian, it's really the best starting point, because every employee at some point in their existence will need to have access to this very information. It might be on day 1. It might be on day 3,438. It needs to be somewhere, though. And the worst thing you could do, though, is assume that every employee knows everything there is to know. So then once you're starting to think like a Martian, what are those critical things that every single person should know and should have access to, even if it seems obvious that everyone should know this? So that's where the thinking like a Martian really will help you. And I like to think the same way that I could when architecting a proposal or presentation. Walk me through every single aspect of what I need to understand. And you might think, okay, well, I have a lot of points to make, but I don't really have an order to it. So how do I get there, right? Well, let's show you how to build out a table of contents, which is really the framework that we're talking about here first. So when you're first starting out, it's likely that you've got multiple critical elements that immediately come to mind as must-haves, right? So when you're thinking about what does every organization, staff member of the organization need, right? You can think of projects, customer service, office technology, our vision, what is our mantra, where does HR stuff go, all that, right? It's very easy and overwhelming, but I recommend write it all down. There's no harm in that, and I really believe that you'll find a way to get it back, find a home for it eventually. Sales materials, customer names, projects and work, social media, policies, brand, all of that. And it's really important to write it all down, because if it came to mind, it's probably important. All right? Now, let's figure out what are those top 5 items that impact everyone the most. Likely the things that everyone in the organization has to know, right? Or needs to have some type of access to. You got them? All right. Let's call that the dashboard. Next, organize all of those other critical items into a simple and intuitive path, right? As a guide, we see businesses using client services, internal IT, HR, finance, sales, and marketing to start. You don't have to use those, but it does help to just start there if you're really lost and you don't know what to do. All that other information that you spent time on gathering is still valuable, and we're going to utilize it, but just figure out your top 5 before you do anything else once that other list is created. So in order to get to the next level of organizing your table of contents, you can start to place those must-haves under the umbrella of the top levels. So for example, here we go. In HR, you can place payroll, health benefits, an employee handbook, etc., right? And see, this is kind of how you're starting to build out that tree. And don't forget, though, Google search is built into sites as well. So if you're concerned that, okay, well, under HR, there's a lot of stuff, maybe someone isn't really thinking that professional development makes sense to them for HR. even though for you it absolutely does. We'll put it there. And if someone's really looking for something more granular, like I'm on the operations site and I just want to look for professional development, they have the search bar available to them. They type in professional development, and it will take them there. So don't forget about that opportunity there. Once you get your top and sub-level sorted out, the operations site can really start to take on a life and a clean and clear look. For example, here's what an ops site looks like when hovering over sales, for example. So you'll see the dashboard is those top 5 items. We have client services, and then under sales we have reporting, sales process, training materials, order management. Now under sales process, that has its own realm to it, right? There's so many different levels of the sales process and how we've worked out how we expect our client life cycle to go from prospecting to actually moving forward. That's a lot of work, that's a lot of documentation, but it's presented in a very clean and easy to clickable way of understanding. So, and by the way, here's that search this site, which is something that becomes really useful to you when you're looking at other options. Now, now that that conceptual architecture is in place, let's discuss how some of those items are going to aid in ensuring your staff depends on utilizing this for operations. One of our tactics is through dynamic content. Now, the reason why I like to phrase it that way is because when you're designing an intranet site, when you're designing an operations manual for your organization, you have to bear in mind that, or continue to ask your question, will my staff use this? And that's really where the simplicity comes into mind. That's why it's so helpful to come up with that dashboard, that table of contents that really simplifies a very clean and easy path to uncover what it is you want your staff to have access to. If it's messy, then people aren't going to use it. And then further, adding dynamic content is something that's going to take that to the next level as well. So this is something we recommend to all of our partners who just adopted to sites. And you want to add useful and necessary dynamic content. For starters, stop emailing reports. Have them located on a page within the site for the staff to track and monitor throughout the work week. Add useful information such as business contact, birthdays, announcements. We keep a running list of all of our clients and projects in sites, so it's easy to access pertinent information. You could do this with pipeline reviews or financial discussions. And also, bear in mind, both Drive and sites allow for granular permissioning. So if architected correctly, only the right groups will be able to access the data that you're presenting. So for example, if you have a senior leadership financial report that you do not want the larger part of your staff to have access to, the combination of page level permissions will prevent. And then if that is negated, also there is the negated if the designer forgets to do that. The site itself, the document itself will have the granular permissions if done correctly and prevent people from being able to see it. They would just get like a large X, or you do not have permission to view and you can request access. That type of warning will come up. So which is great because you have like multiple layers of security there to make sure that the wrong information isn't in the wrong hands within the organization itself. Because you can also make sure that only people that are under your org or .com will have access to the site. So that's always very, very nice and fun to do. So I like that our team, rather than asking where something is, they know to go to our operations site. So embed Drive files, folder structures within sites. It's so helpful to have projects or process information within a page. Adding the respective data in Drive only further enhances the experience. And then also, recently, Google, for both the new version and the older version, iframe capability is available. So this is great. If you're, for example, let's go to the HR section of your site, and you want people to understand where do you access payroll, where do you access your health benefits. Usually that is an external link, not something that you directly control. So let's say you're going to your healthcare provider, you can add an iframe, and then people can actually log in and go through the site within your operations site. which is a nice to have because it just further simplifies where folks are driving from, and they know that I can go to the operations site and I always have the right link to get to my health benefits, which is really helpful, and or payroll, also helpful. So Google makes it really easy to add such dynamic content to the site, and we'll make it, and really it doesn't get much easier than this. And this is just a screenshot of adding a spreadsheet, for example. So you just click on Insert, select Drive, and then add the spreadsheet. It's really that simple. You can insert charts, graphs, and other living material as well. And what's nice is it never gets stagnant, right? There have been many times where I've seen a great operations manual or intranet site, but it's all stagnant PDFs. Well, what happens if they update those PDFs? What happens if new material has been released and this hasn't been updated? Well, if you're using the live document and people only have view-only access, so they can't edit it, and they just need to see the content, as long as the primary editors from HR or leadership are editing and updating that information, it's going to continue to always be up to date. This is such a time saver and really helpful for the entire organization. It just makes the site more meaningful to the people that are utilizing it. And just as an example, as you're holding your sales meeting, get real-time updates by utilizing a sheet, a Google Sheet, or an ROI calculator, or even using iframe, some other source of truth where that data is being captured. Then you can place that into the site and just have that meeting run there, rather than having everyone log in and try to figure out where they're supposed to be and where is the document. Sales manager can just click on the pipeline within the site, share their screen, and they're up and running. Pretty good stuff. So there's a lot of opportunity for deeper integrations too. So remember to really make the dashboard pop with content that's relevant to the whole org, such as events, mass communications, organizational updates, reports, and live charts. Make it easy by linking to external links to your team that your team depends on. Like using that iframe example, I think would really help with health and payroll. Make sure that all the work that you put in the table of contents is also included in the dashboard. That'll make it even easier to navigate through the operations site. So basically, on the left-hand column, they can always expand the tree and jump to where they want if they're someone that really depends on utilizing that that type of tree search versus using the actual search itself. But don't forget that there's also Google Search built in as well, which might be even more accessible. Embed relevant Google Drive folders within each page. The more you can isolate pertinent content, the more likely your staff will depend on the site. Place commonly used documents, spreadsheets, and presentations right into the site's page. It's also helpful for staff to learn what it is they're expected to do by scrolling through the processes you've put in place. This is something I think that gets overlooked quite a bit. If you spent all that time documenting a process, have a place for it to live so that people can reference it and they know they can be accountable for what it is that they're expected to do. And don't neglect Google Groups as well for announcements and for just different aspects of parts of your organization that people want to have visibility into, or general announcements. Just having a place for that to live outside of email, all the clutter of email, mind you, is really quite nice to have. Good. All right. Next we have there's more to add as well, such as storing commonly used templates for proposals, order forms, and other regularly used content. I would recommend tools like Lucidchart. It's something that I use constantly, almost jokingly, because people think I'm a little obsessed with the tool, but I love it for process work, project work, trying to design what it is that when something comes into the office or replace starts, how does it cross the finish line? What is it needed to do? Lucidchart's great for that. Google Forms for expense reports and reimbursements is really helpful. Rather than going through Google Drive to find the form, just have it on the site so people know that they just go to the site and they click, and then there's the form, they enter their information, and they're done. And you can even add attachments to forms, so it's really pretty simple to do that. And so if you have that image of that receipt, then you're off and running. And then lastly, we love keeping vacations, days off, and projects or events on a calendar for everyone to view. that becomes something that's really difficult to accomplish when your organization continues to grow. It's hard to know when people are available, when people are on vacation, etc., especially as your staff continues to increase in size. This is a good place. So the last portion of developing an operations site is really enabling a fluid and manageable authentication plan. Role-based permissions is something that we talk a lot about in our Drive as a file server methodology, but we see that since Google Sites tends to lend itself to this sort of ad hoc as-needed sharing method, it works with a small team, but we see a lot of customers that are trying to just share to individuals on an as-needed basis, which gets confusing. So for example, like Phyllis, Sally, Wendy, and Jim, they all have access to this page, and they can look and they can do what they please. But we recommend taking it a little bit further. So going back to that non-human account, the admin setting up this site, it really will help if you start utilizing role groups. So there are role groups in the admin panel specifically for administrating and making sure access is granted correctly. So maybe Phyllis and Sally are members of the sales group, and Wendy and Jim are members of the marketing group. What's important here is using these groups that are specifically designed for sites and Drive. We do not recommend using your basic email distribution groups, mind you, that you would use for email purposes. This is specifically why that when you're naming it, you give the name role. That way there's a clear delineation between within the admin panel between your role groups for sites versus your distribution lists and groups for Gmail. Another consideration is to ensure these groups are restricted, so they won't be used as an email distribution list. So once you do away with your single user permissions and enable the role-based permissions, you end up with a dramatically cleaner permissions list. And you have the non-human admin account who is owning this site and managing the permissions and utilizing the role groups. And it just makes a lot easier for the rest of the staff. So some other things to keep in mind. Using role-based permissions to will make for a significantly faster employee and offboarding process. So I guess coincidentally, if you want to expedite your onboarding or offboarding process by utilizing this, you'll do so, even if part of that process is reading the onboarding process within the site. When Sally comes aboard, we don't need to think about the 7 to 13 things that she needs to have access to. We just need to understand what role she plays, and she'll have access to the right portions of the site, the right documents and Drive, etc. Keeping a cleaner permissions list is also significantly easier to manage. The last thing you want to see, from an admin perspective, is a 60-line item permissions list. That's a nightmare. And then, as discussed, using restricted G Suite groups is the best practice. We highly recommend to make the above much easier. So once your site is created, then really what you want to do is make it easy to access for your users. So spend the time and resources to learn how to do that, right? A couple really simple suggestions to get you started is to take the sharing link from Google Sites and shorten it, something that your Bitly would be able to accomplish. Very easy to do. And then when you hire new employees, part of their training is giving them a link so they can access these these assets. So where do you start, right? Well, the only way that this formula works is if you're completely invested in the work that it entails. Understand the value of performing a full audit in order to properly document this new architecture for the site. Educate leadership and colleagues on the implications of making such a switch, and train. Even if you think that this site is extremely easy to read and use, do yourself a favor and do what I'm doing right now and record this session. Make it available to your staff. Have an all hands, order pizza, whatever it may be, to show them what's going on, to simplify and advocate the use of this site. So remember, think like a Martian. When Marty first steps foot at your organization, he's pretty clueless as to who your customers, partners, suppliers, team members are. Further, he could get easily inundated with welcome messages, login credentials, and other various data points. If you're an organization that uses a lot of apps outside of G Suite, having a process or a place to start to say, okay, this is our two-factor authentication tool that we utilize to log in. Here's the 5 things that every staff member needs to have access to. Maybe it's Slack, maybe it's our CRM solution, maybe it's all of the above. And here's how you get started based upon your credentials or your email address. Log in, we'll get you started. Here's the two-factor authentication app that we use. Download it on your phone, etc. And start to make that day one process so much smoother and elegant, and making the new employee really excited about doing the work, which is why you hired that person in the first place. If you want more help, we invite you to consider partnering with us. We'd be happy to do that. We offer a slew of different opportunities for organizations that are interested in this type of methodology, whether it's deploying G Suite or utilizing this methodology for deploying Google Sites. We'd be happy to work with you. Here's just another simpler model of what it is, what we can do, try to make you guys rock stars with us, etc. We'd love the opportunity. So let's recap though. This isn't a simple and plug and play task, right? It requires a lot of planning, and without it, you'll end up being really no better off than you are today. Consider what type of content should be added to the site, especially the dashboard. And the goal is not only to have this site serve as an operational hub, but also as a tool that your staff depends on. And lastly, utilize role-based groups for authenticating content with Google Sites. This will ensure that the content is both accessible and only editable by the right staff members. Now I want to get you a copy of our guide. If you really are considering working with us, or you like what we have to say, here, if you go to the chat section, I'm going to drop in that link right there. That should get you access to our operational our white paper that I just reviewed. It gets a little bit more granular, which is nice, and so it's yours. Enjoy. If you would like to work with us, if you like our methodologies and say, hey, this is great, doesn't really solve my question, but I want to learn a little bit more about what you guys do and see if you guys can help, that is what we do. We are an organization designed around helping organizations be more productive. If IT is part of that, so be it. If it's more process-driven, so be it. That's what we're here for at Ripple. So please feel free to reach out to us directly. You can also inquire by just going to rippleit.com, or you can just, if you want to contact us directly, you can just send us an email at sales@rippleit.com. All right, well, I appreciate everyone's time. Again, everyone's going to get a copy of this recording, and I'll be certain to assist you guys if you have any further questions. I see that there are a couple of questions. We are running a little low on time. I wanted to make sure I got you guys out of here, so I will take a look at this question and reach out to the individuals directly. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.